Hey there, I'm Chris Benetti, host of the Smart Author podcast. In this episode, I speak with Azul Terronez of Authors Who Lead, and we discussed how becoming an author can open up a world of opportunity for you. Some of the main topics we will be covering today include Azul's simple secret for making way more book sales, how becoming an author opened up opportunities left, right, and center for him, and how to put your marketing cap on as an author. At the end of this episode, please make sure you visit our website where you can find the show notes plus all the links mentioned with Azul. And if you're enjoying this episode, please make sure you subscribe so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. And of course, if you're struggling with book sales, head over to smartauthormedia.com/audit to get a free audit and a clear plan to get your book sales back on track. Now, let's head over to this fantastic interview. Hey, Smart Authors, welcome to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Azul Terronez. Azul, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Now, Azul runs a business called Authors Who Lead, and it is a fantastic business helping authors with a whole range of stuff. I don't want to go into it too much. I'd actually prefer if you can give everyone a bit of a rundown of what you do and a bit of your backstory, in the next minute or so.
Yeah. So we help authors write and publish books that people love. And I spend the majority of my time coaching leaders to get the story that's inside of them out of their hearts and heads and onto the page. And in 90 seconds or less, my origin story is I really always wanted to be an author, but was always terrified to put my name on the page because people would judge me, tell me I'm terrible. And I'm a dyslexic, so writing has always been hard. So I was terrified, but one of the first things I did was wanted to be an entrepreneur and write a book, but didn't know how to go about it. So I signed up for a business event with an entrepreneur named Flynn, and Pat Flynn inspired me, and he had an in-person event in San Diego. So I signed up for it, so excited about joining an event I could actually join. I was a school teacher at the time and barely had 2 nickels to rub together. So when I signed up for this event with 20 entrepreneurs, I was thrilled because he was bringing his buddy, Chris Ducker, another great entrepreneur. And the thing about it was awesome, except for I didn't read the fine print, which is you need to be an entrepreneur to do this. And I wasn't. And he sent me an email saying, what's your list size? What's your business model? How many followers do you have? And I didn't even have a business idea, let alone a list. So I was thinking, what am I going to do going to this event? They talked about this hot seat thing on a mastermind, which I had no idea what that was. So I thought, I had been planning to write this book. So the 30 days before the event, I wrote a book and I showed up and had delivered it to my editor the day before. And that's all I did on my hot seat was explain my idea for a book that I just wrote. And I don't have a business, but here I am. And that's how I got started in this whole thing, is talking about writing a book. And though I was a teacher, a principal of schools, and a professor, I didn't know anything about online entrepreneurship. So that's how I got into this business. And the short story of it is, after that event, Pat Flynn asked me to be his book coach, and I helped him write his Wall Street Journal bestselling book called Will It Fly? So that's how I got here.
Wow, that's so awesome. So how long ago was that?
That was 2014 when I wrote the book. And
yep.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride since.
Wow, man. Well, you've accomplished a lot in the past 8 years, far out.
Yeah, it's been surprising because it wasn't that I ever had a really clear plan or intention. So leaving that event, people just kept asking me if I would help them. They were more interested in how did you write a book in 30 days than they were in anything else. So that just became the thing I did, is start to help entrepreneurs write and publish their books. And I didn't have a website for 2 or 3 years. It just became word of mouth. And so it took me a while to find my footing before I actually knew how to do more than just help people write books.
Well, one of my questions was, what led you to becoming an author? I think we just got that answer.
You
it's
know,
pretty awesome that it's a part of your origin story in general, which is cool.
yeah, it is really crazy. The impetus of that was one of my students, because I was a school teacher. And one of the things is I made sure every one of my 8th grade students was a published author before they left my class. And that's pretty remarkable considering it was 2006, 2007. It was early on in the self-publishing world. But I thought if young people could become published authors, they could do anything. And so I had a book fair where kids would put their books out and other students would come read their books. And it was pretty amazing. But one of the students sort of naively came to me and said, Mr. Terronez, I want to put your book out. Could you please show me where it is? Because the kids are coming. And I balked a bit saying, I don't have a book. And they looked at me saying, well, why not? Like, and I thought about lying for a moment because I'm the teacher. I said, I wanted to say it's all about the kids. It's not about me. But the truth was I was terrified. And I just told them I'm afraid. And they said, you don't need to be afraid. You tell us not to be. You'll be fine. And that's really where I got the push to write, because it just was set out of the mouth of babes. It was so obvious that I didn't need to be afraid. And that's really the initial push that got me to start. And then the impetus to finish was having to go to this event and not look like a fool because I had no business at all. So that was kind of motivation to finish.
Wow. So, and was your book based around business or anything like that? Or was it just like experiences? Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So the obvious choice would be, after being in school for 25 years, would be to write about teaching, but I wanted to get out of teaching. And so it felt awkward to write about something I was trying to leave. So the premise of my book was called The Art of Apprenticeship, how to basically find a mentor and make a living doing what you love. And so it was really about, actually, you should never go back to school. You should actually follow people who are doing what you want to do and be their servant and learn from them by being of service. And so my book really was about that, because I was like, if this works, then my goal is to make Pat Flynn my mentor. I didn't know him. I never met him. I only listened to his podcast because it was fairly new and read his blog. But I wrote this thing saying, this is how you grow and find your mentor of your dreams. And actually, Pat Flynn has been my mentor ever since. And I meet with him every week. It's pretty amazing going from not knowing this guy, knowing nothing about online business, to have one of the most successful online business entrepreneurs out there, for definitely for those of us trying to start out. So the principles work because obviously it did what it was supposed to do, which was not sell a million books, but help me find my mentor.
Yeah, right. And how awesome is it that Pat Flynn was also your first like proper client or coaching client?
Great, sort of crazy actually. People always ask, well, how did you get, especially several years ago, how did you get Pat Flynn to be your first client? I was like, he asked me. I don't know how that actually happened. I did never ask him. It wasn't like I said, hey, I'm a book coach, I should help you. I didn't say anything like that. And the truth was, I made my effort to serve his community and serve him more than I worried about trying to take. And that is really how it happened. And I think that's the thing I took away from writing the book, as well as trying to help people understand, is if you go to take, then you will take, but you won't ever receive, because you are just a taker. So that principle was just a theory at the time, but I was hoping that the ideas and principles would flesh out, and they surely did.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, generally, I so agree with that. Like, people know who the takers in the room are, and they can sense that stuff as well. Especially people who are experienced entrepreneurs. Like, they deal with takers all day, every day, whether it's in business or in life. Like, everyone wants a piece, so they know who's
Right.
there to give and who's there to take.
I didn't realize that because I wasn't in online space, so I didn't have any context to that. So it wasn't. Yeah, I had no idea. It was as if it were magic, to be honest. Like, it was unbelievable, because not only did I meet Pat, I also meet Chris Tucker, who is an incredible friend to this day. And I didn't know what to expect. And here, every moment he was introducing me to somebody. Here, meet Lewis Howes. Here, meet this person. I was like, what's going on? Like, I don't know. I don't even know what to do with all this attention. And I just decided not to be overwhelmed. Just appreciate it. Like, don't try to do anything more with it than to just be grateful. Because I surely didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't because I had a logical plan towards, like, this is what you should do. And I think that, the naive part of me just said, okay, this is just how it goes, I guess.
And today I see you getting tagged everywhere on Facebook whenever someone's asking for a recommendation. So it's obviously
Yeah.
continued.
Yeah, it has. It's really quite wonderful, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah. So what other doors did writing a book or becoming an author open for you? Because, you know, I see you obviously have been connected with Chris Ducker, who is an amazing entrepreneur and author. You know, Pat Flynn, been able to work with Pat Flynn on multiple bases. You know, what other doors did becoming an author open for you?
Yeah, so I had the premise of the book is like sometimes we try to shoot for the stars, which I was. I wanted to get to know Pat Flynn and Chris Ducker. But I also, like most people in 2008-ish, that time period, I was looking up to people like Tim Ferriss. I was like, this 4-hour work week sounds crazy. I'd love to know more about this. Here I'm a teacher slaving away. I'd love to be able to work 4 hours a week. But I was like, my idea was everyone tries to reach people like that. And when you get a certain level, it's really the gatekeepers become very strong. So my premise was if you can serve the person just under him, the second in command, you can access a great deal of knowledge. And so I just continued on with the principle, and I reached out to Tim Ferriss's first employee. His name was Charlie Hohen. And Charlie was behind some of the works around the launch of his book, 4 Hour Body, and was working with him as one of his first employees. So I figured I can learn a great deal from somebody who intimately was involved. And so I started following him and actually started having hired him as a coach. And that relationship um, blossomed, and we became great friends even after we started working in a coaching relationship. And the book allowed me to have access to people, and that also gave me an opportunity to be introduced to some TEDx speakers. Charlie was one of them, and then he introduced me to a TEDx organizer in the Dominican Republic. A short conversation, 30 minutes or so, and I was invited to speak and give a TEDx talk. I never applied for it. He just sort of said, you should come talk. I was living in Shanghai at the time, and he's like, I'll fly you here. I'll put you up. Just get out here. What do you want to talk about? He goes, you whatever you want. Just come, and I know it'll be great. I was like, okay. Like, that's being an author sort of gave me access to the world I didn't know existed. And it just sort of kept happening like that. Just being an author, being connected to people just allowed me to be connected to 2 more people, and then 3 more. And pretty soon, everywhere I would go, people somehow seemed to know of me. I didn't, like, it was really bizarre. But then being able to give a TEDx talk, 5 or 6 years ago, that was actually more rare than is now. A lot of people seem like they've been able to do it, but it seemed pretty unique. And that's an example of what being an author allowed me to do. It just opened doors. It allowed me to then give that talk and then be able to speak all the way around the world. And that has been an incredible experience as well. Another benefit of being an author.
Mm. And what impact did that have on your business? Were you like, as you went to do TEDx and things like that, were you running your Authors Who Lead business at that time?
Yeah, I had moved to Shanghai as a coach. So one of the things I wanted to do is move out of the classroom because it's all consuming when you're sitting in front of kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I found another position that allowed me to do my job, but also be able to continue to podcast, which I wanted to do. I didn't know anything about, continue to write. And people just kept reaching out to me. So I wanted to be able to coach clients. So I was coaching clients at the time and trying to transition out of working full time, but still, you have to do your side hustle. And I was, and it allowed me to actually leave that job in 2017 and work full time as a coach. So I was coaching authors who wanted to find out, how do I do this? How do I write? How do I, they're not professional writers. They're leaders. They just want to be able to tell their story right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of like the opportunity started to rise, and Authors Who Lead, the name changed because earlier on it was just Azul, Coach Azul. I didn't really have a business plan or a business idea. So I had to give focus on, like, who am I serving? And the more I thought about it, is I'm serving people who have a bigger agenda than just writing a book. There are a lot of people who help people write books, book in a weekend, book in a month, book in 30 days, book, all these things, which are wonderful. But I had a focus. I really wanted to serve the niche of leaders like Pat Flynn and Chris Ducker. And so I wanted to focus on that niche. So that's kind of how I evolved. It's who I ended up serving. And so that's sort of it continued to grow and evolve as it is today. But it did start out as me just as a solopreneur without any support until it became necessary to hire people to help me.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like when you get to that stage as well, especially when you make the transition out of working a side hustle to now like, okay, I'm all in, it almost becomes like things are like everything's possible, you know, like there's no limitation now on your mindset because you can see the possibilities. You're connected with the people, you know exactly what others are doing. Like you can see it so clearly. But when you're like stuck in like, okay, I've got one foot in a job and then one foot in a business, you're like, you can't actually have that clarity around what you're doing and the movement around everything.
Yeah. And it's also difficult because you're serving two masters, right? I'm definitely want to help do an excellent job here and then working there. So sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night is not ideal. Though a lot of people do it, but it's not something I would suggest or sustain. And, and I had a career for 20 years. So I wasn't new. I wasn't at a place I had to kill in college. I wasn't something I could risk failing too hard. I had to be strategic.
Yeah.
And so that was a bit of a challenge to kind of keep the side hustle going for a couple of years so that I could make the transition. And I wasn't even sure. It was my son that said, I think you can do this. I was like, oh, I don't know. He's like, you should just try. Like, what do you have to lose? You can always go back to teaching or being a principal.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you're right. I should definitely give it a shot. And actually all the way up until I had gotten a big position offer in Brazil, and I was like so tempted to take it because there was so much money, all this, have a driver, have a, personal chef. I was like, this sounds really nice. Why would I give this up? But it was my husband that reminded me, like, you're gonna fall back in the trap where you just rise up the rank in success, but you won't be doing what you love. You'll be doing somebody else's work. So though it was difficult to get rid of 2 full-time salaries because I brought on my husband, I was like, gosh, we're gonna have to replace 2 full-time 6-figure salaries in our business. Like, we're not making even a fraction of that now. Like, it's a big gamble. But to your point, if we didn't focus, we would never know if we could do it. And that was really hard. But I think a lot of people, especially middle age, you're terrified. You're like, what if I don't have insurance? What if I can't do this? And I think the point is, like, your expertise is worth more than what you're probably paid already in your job. So why not give it a chance?
Yeah, I love that. I'm reminiscing here about when I had to make the transition from what I was actually a tradesman. So making the transition from what I was qualified into where I'm at now was it was absolutely scary. But I almost did the opposite of what you did. I kind of just burned my boats and just jumped right in. And didn't have much luck. But found, I became an apprentice or became an intern, and I just worked hard to make it work. And I'm so glad that I made that decision.
It's great when you can make that clarity decision, but it isn't always easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. Especially when you have people relying on you, like we all have people relying on us, and the fears weigh on us so much, and it's very hard to make a logical decision when there's fear, reliance. Like, it becomes an emotional decision at the end of the day, and it's very hard to navigate those waters.
Yeah, I would agree for sure.
So I want to transition into selling as an author. I want to get your opinion on what you think the best strategies are to sell books. How do we put marketing hats on as authors, and is there any secrets to making more book sales from your perspective? I think you have some pretty cool techniques here.
Well, what's interesting is I get asked this question a lot. Aside from growing an audience, which is the obvious choice, well, if you just have a big audience, it's easier to sell things. But that's not always as obvious as it seems, because even if you have a big audience, you're still selling one book at a time. So I had the creator of the board game Pictionary. Maybe you've played it as a kid or heard of Pictionary, but the creator was on my show because he authored a book, and I was glad to interview him on the Authors Who Lead podcast. His name is Rob Angel, And we had a great interview. And after the interview, he said, if we chat a bit? I said, well, of course. I like, let's chat. He's like, I have questions about marketing. And it was a bit intimidating. Here's this quite successful entrepreneur. I have great respect for anyone who built a business before there was an internet, for sure. And so we chatted a bit, and he said, I want to sell more books. I said, well, here's the secret to selling more books. I go, you want to double your book sales overnight? He's like, yes. I said, then stop asking people to buy a book. He's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, if I don't ask people to buy a book, how am I going to double my book sales? I said, only tell people to buy multiple copies of your book whenever you talk with them, and you'll double your sales. So don't ever say, go buy my book. Say, hey, go buy my book for you and a friend. Don't ever say buy my book. He goes, I go, that they're going to do what you tell them, because if they're going to buy one, why don't you tell them to buy two and double your sales? In fact, better yet, have them buy a crate, have them buy a box. Like, I go, your mindset shifts if you believe that people don't need the product is you, not your book. So you're more valuable than a $26 book. So why don't you tell them to do what you want? He's like, oh my gosh, I just never would have thought of that. Like, it's not complicated, but most of us are conditioned to say certain things. And I said, you'll change everything about the way you sell books if you don't ever think about selling single books anymore. So that's kind of what I would say to anyone listening is like, think of ways to sell multiple copies whenever you're strategizing. People will buy a single book here and there because they do, because it serves them. But if they're doing it for your sake, they'll buy whatever you tell them to do, and tell them to buy more, and they will. I know it seems silly, but it's really the strategy you could employ. And people who do, find people buy a book and buy one for themselves. And if you tell them buy one for their friend, they will. So like that's an example. It's so simple that people really overcomplicate it with all these funnels and stuff. I said, it's just more about your mindset. The other thing I would say is when you're trying to sell books, don't think of books like entrepreneurs think about a launch. Entrepreneurs think about launches, and they're very, very focused. They focus intently for 30 days to launch the thing, and they make their money, or they do whatever their goal is, and they move on. Books are like babies. I mean, you can celebrate their birth, and you could even celebrate their 1-year birthday. But a book is like a baby. They carry on. So you have to think of a book not as an event, but as a long process. How long are you willing to nurture this book? If you're not willing to nurture this book for 5 or 6 years, you shouldn't write it. You shouldn't promote it. It doesn't have staying power. If you're not interested 5 months from now, 6 months, 6 years, then the book won't last. One of my dear friends, Hal Elrod, who wrote the beautiful book, Miracle Morning, the book didn't take off for several years, and has gone on to be one of the best-selling self-published books in the industry, because he just didn't give up on it. That's the focus he had every year, every day, every month. And now he doesn't have to do it anymore. It does its own thing. He built a community around his book, and it just keeps doing its own thing. So I just want to encourage people, stop thinking of a book as a launch. It's not a launch. It's a birthing. It's a beginning, and it doesn't end. Even when your kids grow at 18, that's not it. They still come back. So you got to think of a book that way. It's not an event. It's an experience with a living thing.
I love that perspective. And often we hear people saying, we have to continue to release books to stay like relevant. But if you write a book that's, something that you think about that should be around for the next 3 decades, then you probably put a little bit more work into the core foundations and the way that you promote the book ongoingly.
Yeah. And how you write it too. I had the privilege of interviewing John Miller, who wrote the book QBQ, Question Behind the Question. He's only written really one book. He sold 1 million copies of that book. He wrote it 20 years ago. He says, why would I promote another book? Why would I write another book when this book's still making me lots of money and still serving my community? That's the kind of what, if you were launching it like a product, you can launch out and next week you launch another product, and that's how people will think of it too. And so you've got to really think differently about a book. It's something that will follow you. You can't take it down. It's in the hands of people. Even if you want on Amazon, you can't pull it down. You could stop being the publisher, but Amazon has the right to continue to sell it because you put it out there. So people own those copies of the book. It's not a YouTube video you can take down. It's not a course or website you can just dissolve. So you've got to really think about a book as an extension of who you are. And with that mindset, you could really think that a book has a long life cycle. Matthew Pollard, who was another dear friend who was on my show, but he wrote the book The Introvert's Edge and another book very similar. He always promotes that book just as if it's brand new, and that's how he continues to keep the book in the forefront of people's minds. And it's a brilliant premise, and he's very successful because of it.
It's almost like we're teaching our audience what their intent or like their attention span should be like when it comes to buying our products.
Right. If you only believe it should be 90 days and you give up on it, then that's true. Most people who write a book, they get tired of hearing themselves talk about their book, but the audience never does. Because remember, every audience that you talk to is new. And even if it isn't new, they forgot about it. And they're like, oh yeah, I bought that. It's sitting on my shelf. I haven't read it. Think of all the books you bought, New York Times, beautiful books, perfect books by great leaders that you never finished, never started, right? So if those books don't get finished, why do you think they're going to finish yours? Because you keep reminding them they should. So you got to remember that books aren't a product, books are you. And if you don't show up, they won't remember you or talk about you or use your principles. So that's the thing. The other thing you can do to help a book sell really well is make sure that it's an idea worth spreading. That's why I love the TEDx concept. Is it worth spreading, talking about? Because books aren't words. And I know this is a funny thing to say as an author. Books are messages that words contain. And they're the message you would give if you could be in their presence, but you can't be everywhere. So the book holds the best concept of your idea as it can without you. So if you don't think of a book as words, and you won't think of a book as a product that sits on a shelf or sits in Amazon, you'll think of it as a way to continue on. And that's something I want all authors to remember. And if you're not willing to carry it on, then questioning whether or not you should be writing that book.
Wow. Well, I think that's a fantastic way to wrap up the episode. And thank you so much for the awesome conversation here, Azul. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure as well.
Is there anywhere where you wish to send the listeners?
Yeah. If you're listening to this podcast, I think go to authorswholead.com and listen to the Authors Who Lead podcast, because I've interviewed almost 200 authors, best-selling authors, brand new authors, and they give away their secrets because I ask them behind the scenes the tough questions so that you can learn from them. So that would be a great place to go.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that everything there is linked up in the show notes as well. And
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you again. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much.
What an awesome episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing on your podcast platform of choice so you get notified every single time a new episode releases. And if you're struggling with your book sales, head over to smartauthormedia.com/audit to get a free audit of your book sales to see where we can help you bridge the gap between not many sales to a lot of sales. It's a free resource call that we have together where I give you some clear action steps that you can take to take your stuff from broken to selling. I'll see you over there. Thanks again for listening.